A reading from the book of Deuteronomy. Moses said to the people, "Today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and doom. If you obey the commandments of the Lord your God, which I enjoin on you today, loving him and walking in his ways, and keeping his commandments, statutes, and decrees, you will live and grow numerous, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you are entering to occupy. If, however, you turn away your hearts and will not listen, but are led astray and adore and serve other gods, I tell you now that you will certainly perish. You will not have a long life on the land which you are crossing, the Jordan, to enter and occupy. I call heaven and earth today to witness against you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. Choose life, then, that you and your descendants may live by loving the Lord your God, heeding his voice, and holding fast to him. For that will mean life for you, a long life for you to live on the land which the Lord swore he would give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Verbum Domini. Blessed are they who delight in the law of the Lord. Blessed the man who follows not the counsel of the wicked, nor walks in the way of sinners, nor sits in the company of the insolent, but delights in the law of the Lord, and meditates on his law day and night. He is like a tree planted near running water, that yields its fruit in due season, and whose leaves never fade. Whatever he does prospers. Not so the wicked, not so. They are like chaff, which the wind drives away. For the Lord watches over the way of the just, but the way of the wicked vanishes.
Dominus vobiscum,
et cum spiritu tuo.
Lectio Sancti Evangelii secundum Lucam.
Gloria tibi, Domine.
Once, when Jesus was praying in solitude, and the disciples were with him, he asked them, "Who do the crowds say that I am?" They said in reply, "John the Baptist, others Elijah, still others, one of the ancient prophets has arisen." And he said to them, "Who do you say that I am?" And Peter said in reply, "The Christ of God." He rebuked them and directed them not to tell this to anyone. He said, "The Son of Man must suffer greatly and be rejected by the elders, the chief priests, and the scribes, and be killed, and on the third day be raised." Then he said to all, "If anyone wishes to come after me, he must deny himself and take up his cross daily and follow me. For whoever wishes to save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will save it. What profit is there for one to gain the whole world, yet lose or forfeit himself?" Verbum Domini. We're honored that the friars have invited me to celebrate this Mass on the feast of the founder of my order, St. Ignatius. He was born in 1491. Think, Columbus was just trying to get to go to what would eventually we find out be the Americas. And so in that context, he's born amongst small nobility up in the Basque country. Lived in the castle, but wasn't real big. And he was the 11th child of the family. And when it comes to inheritance, at that stage, there's not much left. The older brother gets the castle, and you get to leave. When his parents had died when he was 16, he went off to be a page, and then sort of went through the stages of joining himself to courts. He would spend time at the royal court on various occasions, and eventually gave himself over to be a soldier to one of the dukes up in the north in Navarre. This, of course, was a time of a lot of war between Spain and France and Germany. They're all involved. And the most important event of that period was his being wounded at the Battle of Pamplona by a cannonball that broke one of his legs and injured the other. And his convalescence took a couple years, partly because the bone set before he could get to a doctor. So they re-break it and set it again. And then when they did that, he saw that there was a bump. Remember, in those days, the kind of tight hose that men wore, with breeches, short breeches, meant that there'd be a bump in his leg. And besides being a soldier and someone who tries to hang around the court, he certainly enjoyed the company of a lot of the ladies, and he did not want a bump in his leg to take away from those good looks that were so attractive to those ladies. And so he had them saw that off without any anesthetic, of course. They didn't have those yet. So this nearly killed him. And it's you'd think, well, you could become very bitter in that kind of a situation. He was the kind of an optimistic person who said, I'll use this to think about how I can further my career as a soldier and a knight. And I want books about good battles and being a knight and all that stuff. And his sister-in-law at the castle said, we don't have any of those books. But we do have a life of Christ and a life of the saints. And only when absolute boredom was driving him crazy did he finally say, all right, I'll read them. And that's where he began that process of conversion and learning discernment. Because thinking about the life of Christ and the saints began to be seen through his own prism, his own worldview, namely that Christ is a great king. And the saints are the lords and ladies of his court. And this gave him, a lot of joy. And he noticed after months of just reading those books that he found more peace in considering the life of Christ and the saints than he did in thinking about more battles. He liked that still, but that faded away, while Christ attracted him. And this brings, at the very start, part of a process that he has been instrumental in bringing so many millions of Christians to over these last 5 centuries. Because one of the things that happened as a result in withdrawing from that attempt to become a minor figure, I mean, that's all he could ever hope to be, a minor character in the drama of European history, where most of us even forget the major characters. We don't remember the major. Yeah, he'd just be a little guy in that. But think big of himself, because he's with all these big people. By withdrawing, he was able to get perspective. And also through a lot of graces that he received, not only in those books, but Our Lady appeared to him toward the end of his convalescence on the Feast of the Assumption. And that was a turning point by which he not only found more peace in considering Christ and the saints, but he began a process of revulsion for the sins he had committed prior. He began to realize, in the face of someone as holy and good as Our Lady, then he could begin to see how bad he was. So he went off to go make a pilgrimage to Jerusalem, bought a simple pilgrim's garment, and then went to Montserrat, a very famous shrine of the Blessed Mother. That's run still to this day by the Benedictine monks. And he left his sword. He did what knights do. Knights, going back to the 11th century or so, were led by priests and bishops to make vigils all night so that they would meditate on what it means to be a Christian knight. It's not just having power and strength and weapons and armor and a horse. That just makes you strong and able to beat up other people. But the vigil of the knights was to remind them that they will be judged by God for how they use their strength, and that they must seek to use their strength to promote justice and stop injustice, to help secure protection of the weak and the poor, and to make sure that they honor people. That's what chivalry was about. And at the time of Ignatius, this was beginning to fade as an ideal. But he goes and makes that vigil not in order to get spurs and a horse, but rather to give up his sword. He left it at the altar of Our Lady of Montserrat, and then became a pilgrim to seek to serve Jesus Christ alone for the rest of his life. And he spent the next 10 months as a semi-hermit, praying 7 hours a day. And in that, going over his life, coming to know Christ more deeply, using the imitation of Christ and the Gospels in order to understand Jesus more deeply, and have his own life put in order. He had a lot of spiritual struggles through all this, but he worked through that, took notes, which eventually became his book, The Spiritual Exercises, the basis of a retreat that he would then induce his fellow students, when he eventually went up to Paris, to make that retreat, a 30-day retreat. And then all of us who join the Society of Jesus make that same 30-day retreat twice. Because it is a basic human need, and even more importantly, a deep Christian need to be able to get away from the enmeshment in culture and get perspective on yourself and on your society. You need to be able to stand back, because otherwise you will take yourself so seriously, which in general is, when people take themselves real seriously, that's one of the best signs that they are crazy. It's the people who can laugh at themselves who have the best sign of sanity, because they have perspective on themselves. The overly serious have no perspective. And by being able to get that kind of perspective through the eyes of Jesus Christ, getting to know him, then we can see that what is really important, as Christ says in the gospel, it is essential for you to give up trying to pursue your ego, yourself. You are not going to be the measure of success in life. God is. So get perspective, and that's what he did. And he spent the rest of his life sharing that with others. Even when he got in trouble with the Inquisition, he was arrested by the Inquisition in Spain. He didn't have a degree. He was just, matter of fact, he went eventually back to school in his 30s to start grammar school. He was about 33 years old when he's in first grade learning Latin. But he had enough perspective and humility to say, if that's what I need to do in order to go to study philosophy and then theology and be a priest and then be able to preach the gospel, if that's what it takes, I'll do whatever it takes. I don't care about being a guy in his 30s in a class with the first grade. I'm going to make sure I can do what is for the greater glory of God, which is the motto he gave to our society. Do everything for the greater glory of God. And all of us need to have the same mentality. It doesn't matter what it takes to do the will of God, what it takes to die to myself in order to be able to serve our Lord. That's what I want to do. And he did that, forming a small group of men, 7 men, later joined by 3 more, who in 1534, the 7 took their vows to serve God, our Lord and our Lady and the saints. They couldn't make a pilgrimage back to the Holy Land, so they put themselves at the service of the Pope to let the Lord speak through him whatever you want us to do. And within 25 years, there are already 3,000 of the members of the society doing all kinds of work in Asia, the Americas, and Europe. That this spread with the idea of sharing with everyone in the church the same kind of call to withdraw from the world, to get perspective from Christ, and to know the direction that Jesus our Lord desires to give each of us.